Hi, welcome to my latest video. Today I'm going to look at hard wiring a rear dash cam. This is a Nextbase 112 dash cam. It's pointing out the rear window, not the front. I've already got a different one on the front. This is a smaller dash cam which will be running with the screen disabled, or the screen set to a screensaver mode, so that it doesn't give a sort of a glare when I look in the rear view mirror. This one here I've mounted with one of these 3M sticky pads here, being careful to avoid the heated rear window element wires, the tracks on the glass. I've mounted that one there rather than down here or up here, because that is, you can just about see, and mark it with my finger, that's the extent of the sweep of the rear wiper. You can't really see with the sun on the glass there. Just about see it here, just about see the edge out here. So it's just within the swept area of the wiper blade, which means that it's not going to be looking out through dirty glass like this. If I have a look inside the boot now, there's the camera there. Now, originally I just wired it in down underneath the seal down here to the 12-volt socket. The problem with that is that socket's always live, and the battery was slowly going flat. If the car wasn't driven for a couple of days, the battery would go flat. So what I'm going to do is use one of these hardwire kits here, which I bought, a Nextbase hard wiring kit, to connect this camera up in such a way that it comes on when I drive the car and then switches off when I turn off the engine. Now, it's worth mentioning these cameras run on 5 volts, not 12, so you can't just cut this and connect it to 12 volts, you'll fry the camera. You have to use one of these kits that's got a little sort of 12 to 5 volt adapter there. So this connects to 12, and then there's another new plug there to go into the side of the camera with 5 volts on it. So I've removed this panel. This panel just pulls down. It's held on by 3 plastic rivets, which will probably break. All 3 of mine broke off and left bits of plastic rattling around on the other side, which is really annoying. The cheap clips on eBay look like a good bargain, but they are more likely to break off. They're a lot more fragile, so it may be worth spending the extra bit of money and buying the genuine Land Rover clips. So I've removed this panel here so that we can get to the wiring that feeds the number plate lights. Okay, because the number plate lights light up when the lights come on. I always drive with side lights or headlights on, so those lights are always on when I drive, so I can wire into those. An alternative is underneath here is the wiper motor. Now the wiper motor does actually have a 12 volt feed which goes live when the ignition is on, so that the wiper can park itself. So if you switch the rear wipers on, the motor is powered up, but then when you turn them off, the wiper blade parks. And it does that by using a 12 volt feed separate from the switched feed. Okay, now as far as I know, that's not permanent 12, it is 12 volts that goes live when the ignition is on. So there's another option there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this panel. To remove that, very simple. Up inside here there's a little Phillips screw and another one there, and that's it. You undo those 2 screws, and then this whole panel just pulls off, and it's held on by poppers, by those plastic rivet things, which will probably break off, we'll see. That whole panel comes off, exposing the wiper motor and the wiring and things like that. So I'll take that off and we'll get the meter out and test the wiper motor to see if that 12 volts is more suitable than the number plate illumination light. The wires for both of those should be inside here. I don't know what colour they are though. I've got a feeling the number plate light is yellow and violet, but I don't know which colour the wiper motor one is. But this wire here, this wiring loom, comes up in here and goes up here and then down round to the lights and the wiper motor. If you're wondering what this paraphernalia is here, this is all to do with the DAB radio, as far as I know. It's either that or the sat nav, one of the two. These boxes here, there's 4 of them. These are just filters to extract the signal, the high frequency digital signal. These wires here go off to the ends of the heating elements for the rear window, and there's also these other wires. I don't know if these are connected to these or not, but these have other connections onto here. So there's basically it's acting like a big aerial there, and these boxes here will sort of take out that signal and send it down a bit of coax wire, which will all go down in there and down in here and off to the radio and the sat nav and whatever needs it. I'm not going to be disturbing any of that, but I do want to try to carefully cut into this insulation here. This is just some sort of felt wrap that's been put around the wires. I'll cut into that and see what we've got. The idea is that I can put this lot, probably cut these wires down a bit because they're a bit long, but put that in here or down there, and then just wire this literally straight in, nice and neat, without this wire kind of hanging down here, which is a bit ugly. Okay, so the next thing to do is take this panel off and I'll test the wiper motor connections and just see what we've got. If we've got a 12 volt ignition, 12 volts, then I'll probably end up using that instead of the number plate light. So once those screws are removed, you just need to pull this down. I've already pulled it down. You just pull the whole thing down against all of the various clips. You can see here those white rivets. Luckily, none of them have broken off. There are also some metal clips up there. There's a lot of clips, so you've got to pull hard. The whole thing will come down with a bit of a bang, but if you're lucky, all the clips will remain in place. These metal clips here sometimes can end up on the other piece. You just pull them off and push them back on there, so they're all in position, ready for refitting. If you're unlucky and the plastic things break off, that might be, no, I think that one's meant to be like that, but it would look like that. I think if one of these broke off, then you'll have to dig out the remains and replace one of the clips. But luckily, all of that has come down quite easily. As I say, I pulled it down first with both hands and then just held it back up for the video so you could see what it looks like when it comes down, but it will need a bit of tugging. So here's the wiper motor. Okay, wires here for the boot latch. Okay, for the lock for the boot. These wires here, I don't know what they to actually. I'm not sure. This here is the sender for my reversing camera. I'll talk about that in another video. So what I'm going to do is get the meter out and test these wires here. Now interestingly, I read up that the number plate illumination lights, actually that's what this is here. That goes through there to the number plate illumination housing. I read up that the wire that feeds that, the yellow violet, which actually does look yellow and violet, but this one here also looks yellow and violet. So a bit worrying that there's two wires with the same colour scheme. See if we can pull that. I think that one's just yellow actually. Difficult to tell. I think it's just yellow. It looks just solid yellow actually. So yellow violet, which I had been reliably informed was the number plate wire, looks like that goes to the wiper motor. So it's always best to pull these panels off and have a check with a meter. Even the Haynes manual and the workshop manual, which I had online, shows yellow violet as being the number plate wire. That doesn't appear to be the case actually. That is solid yellow. Solid yellow, unless it's yellow violet here. No, that's just black. Okay, so looks like the manual's incorrect there, so just be careful when cutting into these wires. What I'm going to do is test these with a meter. I'm guessing that the black one there is probably ground, unless it earths through the chassis. There's an earthing point there. Not sure. It might earth through the bolts that are mounted on. I don't know. And then we're going to have a wire that goes live when the rear wiper needs to run from the stalk, and then an ignition live to allow the wiper to park after you've turned it off on the stalk. So I'll test these and we'll see which is which. I'm hoping I can wire into one of those for the dash cam rather than the number plate wires. The number plate wires are very small, very thin, low current wires there, so don't really want to start cutting those if I can help it. It'd be much better to cut a bit of this off and put a couple of bullet plugs on there. Worst case, if the connection fails, the rear wiper just doesn't park itself, so it would be pretty obvious that the dash cam is turned off as well. The problem with a rear dash cam with the screen turned off is you never know if it's actually running or not. So I'd prefer a fault with the wiper park than a fault with the rear number plate illumination. Okay, so it would be better to use one of these. Okay, I'll get the meter out and turn on the rear wipers and we'll see what happens. So what I've done now is turn on the rear wiper, and then we'll get the meter into these wires here and see which one, one's a 12 volt. Okay, so what I've done here, I've got my multimeter and I've wired up, I've got the zero, the ground connected to this earthing point here. Just stick that carefully into the centre yellow one, and that is reading as good as 12 volts. Wobbling slightly when the motor runs, which is what you'd expect. So that's our 12 volt feed. Not sure if it's permanent or with the wiper, so let's go for this is green and violet as opposed to yellow and violet, and that's not reading anything. Let's just see if that changes when the wiper runs. Oh, it does. Okay, so green and violet, this one here, pulses. Okay, so the the pulsing is not done in the wiper motor. It is done by the computer, probably, at the front of the car, and that wire goes 12 for about half a second when the wiper motor runs. Okay, so that's this third one here. The center yellow and violet is always 12. That one's the one that's used for the park. This one at the end here, I'm pretty sure is 0 volts. It's just a 0 volt connection to the motor. So that is 0. Let's just see if that changes. It runs, flicking about a little bit, but that's probably what you'd expect, actually, a very small amount of voltage on the 0, because don't forget there's a bit of resistance in this wire running all the way to the front of the car. It's going to have an ohm or 2 of resistance, so hence potential divider theory. We have a very small amount of voltage there, about 0.1 volts. So that black and grey is 0 volts, earthed somewhere else, don't know where, possibly up the front of the car, I would have thought, judging by the small amount of voltage there. And then we've got yellow and violet wire there, which is ignition 12 volts. So that goes live when the ignition's on, and then green and violet, which is our intermittent pulsing to make the rear wiper wipe. Okay, so the interesting thing here is if I could find the other end of that green and violet, you could actually control the rate at which the rear wiper wipes. So you actually have a variable intermittent speed, or even an automatic rear wiper. So there's a future project. I'll hold that thought. Right, so this one here, yellow and violet, is the wire that I want to connect into for my dash cam. I would get a knife, cut back some of this, either here or probably actually up here, might be better. Find that wire and connect into it. Okay, so what I've done here is to cut back some of this horribly sticky felt insulation wrap that Land Rover put around these wires. It's pretty grim, sticky stuff. So I've now exposed these wires, and you can see they're yellow and violet. That is the one that goes all the way down to here, and that is ignition 12 volts. So what I'm going to do is try to see if we can pull a bit of slack through on that if possible. I'm just going to try and probably cut that and put a bullet connector or something on there, or maybe even solder. Actually, might be best to solder a connection on there. Let's have a look at this and just see what we've got here. So this actually has a bullet connector already on it. So it might be, well, actually I want to cut, there's meters and meters of wire on there. God knows why they give you so much cable. It's crazy. So I really want to cut that down as much as possible. The reason is they also give you meters of this wire which goes to the camera. I can't cut this down because there's a sort of what I think is a mini USB or micro USB connector on it there, and I'm not gonna get into rewiring that up. So this black wire stays, and that will just have to be tucked out of sight. Red and black, I want to cut down as much as possible. Now they do actually give you a fuse as well. I'm not going to fit that, mainly because this wire, this wiper feed, should already be fused. Okay, so there is a fuse, I think, in the engine bay which does the rear wiper. Hopefully this wire is also included on that fuse. I'm not sure really. I mean, the only way to be sure is to pull out the fuse and see if it cuts out. Yeah, it's going to be tricky trying to. Unfortunately, that's not a sort of an inline fuse holder. Might be worth me trying to get a small inline fuse holder actually, just to be safe. Maybe just put a 5 amp fuse or something. What do they put in here? So that's a 2 amp fuse. So that's something for me to do next time I go to Halfords, is get a small inline fuse holder and put a 2 amp fuse there. That's got a bullet connector socket there, so if I can rig this so that a fuse can be easily added later on. The fuse for the wipers is probably something crazy like 20 amps. Yeah, I think we do need a much smaller fuse as well as the original fuse on this wire. Okay, right, I'm going to cut this and rig up a branch off here. I'll try and actually do it properly with the soldering iron. So I've just cut this yellow and violet wire, taking care to bend them well away from the metal bodywork, just to prove that this is the rear wiper park feed, motor park feed. I'll just run the wiper, and if I turn the wiper off, it should, you see, it stops. It doesn't park. The wiper still works, but it doesn't park after you turn it off. Okay, so that proves that that wire is the wiper park feed. Okay. So what I can do now is I'm going to strip this carefully strip this back a bit, and I'll get the soldering iron and solder those two together with an extra wire coming off, which I'll connect onto a bullet plug. It'll be a bullet socket like this. I could probably actually just use this one, actually cut that off, that fuse, and use that. And then I'll be cutting this down. I'll put something very similar on the ends of the wires when I cut them down. That way I can easily add a small line fuse later. Actually got two different sizes of fuse in this kit. Neither of them are going to work for us. Okay, right, I'm going to strip those back and get the soldering iron going and wire those in. So I've rigged up the soldering iron out here. I've tried tinning the ends of these wires. This is quite thick cable, and even though it's a nice sunny day today, there is a cold wind blowing. I'm just not able to get enough heat into this to properly melt that solder. And adding an extra wire on as well is just going to make things even worse. So I'm going to have to resort to using some bullet connectors on this, I think, rather than soldering it. It's just a shame really, because I wanted to do it properly with solder and heat shrink and everything else, but I just can't do this with the current soldering iron I've got. This is an 18 watt. It's just not powerful enough. I need to get at least 25 watts, maybe 35, just to get the heat into that wire and melt that solder. Okay, we'll give up on that. Okay, so what I've done for now is just connect up this using one of these little connector blocks. It's just a temporary fix until I can get myself a more powerful soldering iron and actually solder that and put a bit of heat shrink on it. The reason why I cut the wire rather than just sort of scraping off some insulation and trying to kind of solder on is because can't insert a piece of heat shrink unless I cut it. So what I've done now is cut down this. They give you meters and meters of wire on both sides. I mean, that's, God knows what that is. It's about 3 meters of wire on one side of this little 12 to 5 volt adapter, and then about another 3 meters on the other side. Crazy, absolutely crazy. So can't cut down the black wire, so I've cut this one nice and short. I'm just going to tin the ends on that with a soldering iron. The black one will have an eyelet put on it, and I will remove this screw temporarily and just stick it underneath there so that earths. There is an earthing strap here on the boot lid, so that's definitely 0 volts. And then I'll just wire into this side rather than this side, because I want to shove that little box thing and all of this black wire, or most of this black wire, into that hole in there, and then put a cable tie around the whole lot and cover it all with black insulation tape. Okay, right, let's get that done, and then this might be ready to power up. Okay, so that's wired in there. Only just had enough wire. I should have actually cut that off with a little bit more wire on there, but hopefully that's enough to allow me to stick that through that hole, hide that away. What I'm going to do now, before I tape that all up and put the panel back on, is I'm just going to plug this into here. Which way round that goes? It goes that way. Right, and turn on the ignition. I'll just see if that powers up. Okay, now the rear wiper just ran, which is interesting. That rear wiper actually ran before I put the key in the ignition. Slightly worrying that that wire's actually live all the time. I haven't actually put the key in or turned the ignition on yet, but let's just see if this powers up. No. Oh, it does. Okay. Right, that's power. It made a noise. Nothing's come up on the display. I don't know if it's because of the sunlight. I don't know. Nothing's really happening. I'd like to take that down. Have a look. I'm a bit worried that this wire is live all the time. I've had to get the meter and check now. Didn't think the wiper would park with the key out of the ignition. Maybe I'm wrong. Right, this isn't good. I've just connected the meter up here to the wire that does feed the wiper motor park feature. And the car is locked now with all the doors shut, the key's out and the car's locked. We've still got 12 volts, which means that is a permanent live wire. Permanent live, which is completely not what I wanted. And the whole reason of doing this is because the cigarette lighter socket in the boot is permanent live, and that's flattening the battery. I should have checked that the wiper park wire went off when the ignition was off, and I didn't think for a minute that it would stay live with the vehicle locked like this, but it is. There it is, 12 volts. How annoying. to find another wire. I think I'm going to have to go back to plan A, which was to use the number plate illumination wire so that the dash cam comes on when the side lights or headlights are on. I drive with the lights on all the time anyway, so that will have to be the way that I do it. After all of that, it isn't going to work this way. That is really annoying. Okay, right, I'll have to put this wire back as it was, and at some point I'll solder it and heat shrink it and take that one back up, but for now it's going to have to stay with this connector block, and I'm going to have to dig into the other wires. One of these other wires in here is the number plate wire. Now, annoyingly, we've got a green and a purple, and about 7 black wires. Great colour coding, Land Rover. Thank you for that. Right. Okay. I'll have to get the meter going and test these other wires and see which one is which. Okay, so looking at this, we've got 3 very thin black wires. Right, 1, 2, 3, which I believe go to this connector, which goes to the number plate lights. There are also 3 slightly thicker black wires that go to the boot lock, which will be one, 2, 3 there. Now these ones appear to have a grey stripe down them. A grey stripe. That one I don't think has. Let's see if these have got a grey stripe. Can't see one. Can't see one, I don't know. So, and then there's green and violet, which is our wiper control. Big green one here, which is the heated rear window, and then a large thick black wire, which is this earth connection here. So that means that 2 of the 3 very thin black wires going into that connector are rear number plate illumination. So if I was to cut one of those, I've got a 2 in 3 chance of hitting a positive lighting control wire rather than the earth wire for the number plate light. Okay, now there's no easy way to test this really. These are all black, so even if I cut in here and ran a wire all the way back up, I suppose I could disconnect that and use the meter on there, but it's I need to connect it up here, and there's no way of tracing 3 black wires all the way back round on this conduit here and knowing which is which. So what I might try and do is just using the knife, just scrape off a bit of insulation, just enough to get a connection on the meter, and then put the headlights on and see if that goes live. Okay, let's try that. I want to try and do this as least destructive as possible. All of these extra joints I'm adding in are going to fail in a few years' time when they get rusty and damp. I will need to solder this up properly and put heat shrink on it, but I won't be able to do that today. Okay, so what I've done here is scrape off a little bit of insulation. The first wire that I tried, I think, is the 0 volt one. It's just typical pot luck. and you get the 1 in 3 that isn't 12 volts when the lights are on. Don't worry, I'll wrap some tape around that, make sure that's safe. The next wire I tried, we've got 0, almost 0. There's always going to be a tiny bit of current from the CAN bus system, but once the car is locked, that should go off to 0. So there's a little bit. If I press on the fob now, so let's just put the lights on. There's the lights. That's now gone up to nearly 12 volts, and the dash cam has turned on. So I've just trapped that wire with the crop clip there. So the dash cam's off, now on. If I turn off the lights, the dash cam's gone off. Okay. Let's try and focus that. Lights on. Yeah, that's on. And now off. That goes off. That's exactly what I wanted to happen. A tiny bit of voltage there just from the light failure warning system. Okay, so that's the wire that I need to cut into instead, not the yellow violet. Okay, now I should be able to solder that one because it's a lot thinner, so it won't conduct the heat so quickly. So I should be able to cut that and solder in to, probably not directly to this one because I want to put a little fuse on there at some point. Yeah, might cut one of these down. Trouble is these wires are very thick, very difficult to solder. Okay, I'll work it out and we'll see what I'm going to do to get that working. Okay, so what I've ended up doing here is just crimping, because the soldering iron wouldn't really have enough heat to join the wires. It would have enough heat to tin the ends. So I've tinned the ends. I've also managed to tin those two together, and then I put them through one of these joiners here. That wire there that I cut earlier incorrectly, I've just joined that one as well. And then I've used a bullet connector here on this. This allows me to easily add in a 2 amp line fuse later. So just pull that apart and then make up a little fuse with a bullet connector either side and sort of add that into that circuit. Just to test this now, let's turn on the lights. Right. Lights are on. Dash cam comes on. Lights off. Dash cam goes off. Okay, so it's not on the ignition, it's on the lights, but that'll have to do. Couldn't wire into the wiper wire, the wiper park feed, because that is permanent, it's not ignition. So I do drive with my lights on, even in the day. So the dash cam will come on when I turn the lights on. Yeah, that'll have to do. Right, what I need to do now is hide this in that hole, plus all of this 3 meters or so of black wire. Coil that up, put a cable tie around it or a twisty tie. Stick all that in there and refit this panelling. Okay. So I've managed to get all of that wire shoved through that hole. It's a bit of a tight fit. Plus the little black box has gone through there as well. And I've taped this up nicely there, taping up those bullet connectors and taking care to sort of wrap a bit of extra around that other wire that I cut the insulation away on very slightly. So that's all nicely insulated up. I'm going to add a little cable tie around here using that hole there, just to hold that in place. This wire's got a little bit of slack on it here, and that'll just poke out underneath the panel. I'm going to put the cable tie on, refit the panels, and then we'll do one last test and make sure that works. Okay, that's that panel back on, the side panel and the boot panel. Just a case of thumping them so that they re-clip. This one here, where I'd cable tied that bunch of wires that I wrapped insulation tape round, was actually in the way of the leftmost plastic rivet. So I had to sort of move that. I bought a bag of these on eBay. Be aware that these cheap eBay ones tend to break when you pull the panels back off again. So it might be worth paying a bit extra for the genuine Land Rover ones, which seem a bit more resilient and not quite so fragile. So that's all back on. There's the dash cam. What I'm going to do now is get in the car, switch the lights on, and what I'll do, if I film over there, let's see if we can zoom in. There we go. I'll turn on the lights. There we go. Dash cam starts up. There's a picture. Now I've configured it so that the screensaver goes off after 1 minute. So at least I know it's working. There we go. It seems to have gone off a lot quicker than 1 minute, about 10 seconds. Let's just turn the lights off. There we go. It's briefly showed the display as it's shutting down, and the red light that was flashing in the corner has gone off. So that's working. Not quite how I wanted it. I wanted it on the ignition, but it'll have to do. It'll have to do. Being on the lights is the next best thing. And that's now looking out the back window, just in case anybody bumps into the back of me. Let's hope that never happens. Good. Well, I hope that video was useful. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.